Chosen one, have you ever felt like your life is stuck, where every plan seems to fall apart and everything you hope for never comes true? What if the moment you felt like giving up was the exact moment everything was about to change? Jack's life had always been a series of ups and downs. In his 30s, he was at a crossroads. He had worked hard, pushed through the grind, and yet nothing seemed to be falling into place. His dream of starting his own business felt more like a fantasy than a reality. Each day he woke up with the hope that today would be different, but it never was. Bills piled up on his desk, and the weight of each unpaid invoice seemed to crush his spirit just a little more. It wasn't just the financial stress. The people in his life, his friends, his family, seemed to be moving forward, while Jack was stuck in place, spinning his wheels. The world around him appeared to be on the fast track while he watched from the sidelines. Friends had success stories, relationships were flourishing, and people seemed to be living their dreams. But Jack, he was barely making it through the week, hoping he wouldn't get a call from the bank. Why is it always so hard for me? He would ask himself late at night, staring at the ceiling. The doubt crept in, filling his mind. Maybe I'm just not meant for success. Maybe I've missed my shot. The more Jack reflected, the more isolated he felt. His phone would buzz with messages of good news from others, and he would feel his heart sink. He couldn't help but compare himself to them. What were they doing that he wasn't? He worked harder than most people he knew. He stayed up late, sacrificed sleep, skipped family gatherings, and even turned down fun nights out. And still, nothing changed. The weight of the world seemed to be on his shoulders, and it didn't help that every day felt like a repetition of the last. His sense of purpose was slipping through his fingers like sand. He was tired. Tired of pushing, tired of waiting, tired of feeling like everything was out of his control. There were moments when he thought about walking away from it all, but something deep inside told him not to. In the middle of his struggle, Jack found himself standing on the edge, questioning everything he thought he knew about his life. Was there something more? Was it possible that everything he was going through had a greater purpose? Jack was at a breaking point. The uncertainty, the financial pressure, and the feeling of being left behind were weighing heavily on him. But despite the frustration, there was something deeper at play. A voice inside him whispered that this season of struggle was not the end, but rather a turning point. Still, he couldn't understand what that could mean. He couldn't see the bigger picture. And for Jack, that was the hardest part. He would find himself asking questions that echoed in the silence of his room at night. Why am I still waiting? Why does it feel like the doors are closing on me one by one? Why can't I catch a break? He felt so close, yet so far from the life he had envisioned for himself. As the days wore on, Jack's frustration grew. The feeling of being stuck in an endless loop of disappointment was overwhelming. Every morning he forced himself to get up and face another day, even though the weight of his dreams seemed too heavy to carry. His business plans, once filled with excitement and passion, now felt like distant fantasies, unattainable, like a dream that couldn't be grasped no matter how hard he tried. One evening, after yet another failed attempt to get a loan for his shop, Jack sat at his kitchen table, staring at the pile of bills that seemed to mock him. The phone rang, and for a brief moment he thought it might be a potential client, or maybe even an offer he had been waiting for. He hesitated, the anticipation almost too much to bear. But when he saw the name on the caller ID, his heart sank. It was a friend, someone who always seemed to have it together, someone who had a family, a stable job, and an easygoing life. Hey Jack, just checking in. I know things have been tough for you lately, but remember, God has perfect timing, man, his friend said with that signature upbeat tone. Jack smiled weakly, but the words stung. Yeah, I know, he replied, trying to keep the conversation light. Don't get discouraged. The waiting can feel like forever, but when it's your time, it'll all make sense. As the call ended, Jack leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The words echoed in his mind. God's perfect timing. It was easy to say, but harder to feel when everything around him felt like it was falling apart. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, trying to quiet his mind. But all he could think about was the endless waiting, the feeling of not being enough, and the pressure mounting every day. Was this really part of a greater plan? Just as the doubt and frustration began to overwhelm him, something strange happened. A memory, long forgotten, resurfaced in his mind. It was a moment from his childhood, a time when everything seemed so simple. He remembered his grandmother, a woman of deep faith, telling him stories about divine timing, how even when it seemed like nothing was happening, God was always working behind the scenes. She had once told him, "Even when you don't see it, trust that God is preparing you for something bigger than you can imagine." The memory hit Jack like a wave. For the first time in weeks, a small spark of hope flickered inside him. Maybe the struggle wasn't a punishment or a sign of failure. Maybe it was just a season of preparation. Maybe he wasn't meant to understand everything right now, but that didn't mean nothing was happening. Jack opened his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek as he whispered, "Maybe I'm not alone in this. Maybe the waiting is part of the plan." For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from things being perfect, but the kind that came from trusting that he was exactly where he needed to be. The path wasn't clear yet, but he could feel something shifting inside him. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was being prepared for something bigger than he could see in this moment. The clock on the wall ticked, and Jack took a deep breath. He wasn't sure how much longer this waiting would last, but he finally understood. The time wasn't wasted. It was a season of growth, a season of becoming. And when the time came, when God's perfect timing arrived, he would be ready. He just had to trust. The next morning, Jack woke up with a strange sense of calm. It wasn't the usual rush of anxiety that had followed him out of bed for months. Instead, it was a quiet, steady resolve, the kind he hadn't felt in a long time. He made his usual cup of coffee, but this time it tasted different. Not better, not worse, just different. It was as if his senses had shifted, and even the simplest things felt more meaningful. As the day unfolded, Jack moved through it with a sense of purpose that had eluded him for so long. He still had his responsibilities, the bills to pay, the endless to-do lists, but something had changed in his perspective. Every conversation felt more present, and even the smallest interactions seemed to carry weight. He started noticing things he hadn't before, the kindness in a stranger's smile, the encouraging words of a colleague, the warmth of the sunlight streaming through his office window. But despite this newfound clarity, Jack knew the real test was still ahead. The battle inside him wasn't over. Self-doubt, the relentless voice that had always whispered in his ear, still lingered, reminding him of his failures and how far he still had to go. But instead of shrinking back, Jack confronted it head-on. He understood now that every moment of struggle, every instance where he felt alone, had been shaping him. Later that afternoon, Jack received a call. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't familiar. It was from a business development consultant who had heard about Jack's plans. They wanted to meet and discuss potential investment opportunities. Jack's heart skipped a beat, but this time, instead of letting the nerves take over, he felt ready. He was prepared for this. For once, he didn't doubt himself. The meeting the next day was more than just a business transaction. It was a confirmation. Jack saw it. Everything he had been working towards, all the sacrifices, The late nights, the self-doubt, were leading to this moment. The consultant was impressed, and while it wasn't a guaranteed deal yet, it felt like a breakthrough. Jack walked out of that office not with a promise, but with something far more important: confidence in his purpose. As the days went on, opportunities began to open up in ways Jack hadn't expected. He found support from unexpected places and doors began to open. More than that, he started seeing the truth in what his grandmother had always said. The waiting wasn't just a pause. It was the preparation for a new season, one where he would finally step into the role he had been called to. And when that moment came, he would be ready. Jack sat down that evening, reflecting on how far he'd come. The struggle hadn't been in vain. It had been refining him, shaping him, and now he could see it clearly. God's timing had been perfect all along. Chosen one, you are not forgotten, Jack whispered to himself, the words flowing out of his heart. Everything you've been through has been for this moment. And with that, Jack knew the real journey was just beginning. He wasn't simply waiting anymore. He was walking, step by step, into the life that had always been meant for him. And when it arrived, he would embrace it fully. Weeks passed, and Jack's life began to transform in ways he had never expected. The momentum he had been waiting for, the breakthrough, came not as one grand moment, but as a series of small, divine shifts. The consultant, who had shown interest in Jack's business, came through with an offer that was more than fair. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about the validation, the recognition that his hard work and persistence had been seen. Jack's shop, which had once been nothing more than a distant dream, was now becoming a reality. He rented a small space in a quiet corner of town, far from the flashy commercial district, but in an area that felt right, humble, yet full of potential. The first few weeks were challenging. There were hiccups, delays, and setbacks. But Jack had learned something important in the waiting. Each setback was just another lesson, another step forward in a process he couldn't always see. One evening, as Jack worked late in the shop, fixing a customer's car, he caught sight of his reflection in the shop's window. He paused for a moment, surprised by what he saw. The tired eyes, the stress lines, the weary posture, they were still there. But there was something else too, a spark, a confidence he hadn't seen before. Jack wasn't just running a shop anymore. He was living out his purpose. That night, as he locked up and walked to his car, a thought lingered in his mind. What if all the waiting, all the frustration, all the doubts were necessary? What if they were the exact conditions I needed to grow into the person I had to become to make this all work? As the months passed, Jack's business slowly but surely started to gain traction. The customers kept coming, some through word of mouth, others through his diligent marketing efforts. He found joy in the small victories: a loyal customer, a positive review, a successful repair. It wasn't glamorous or easy, but it was fulfilling. He had finally stepped into the life he had been waiting for. But more than that, Jack realized he had changed. He no longer saw himself as someone who was waiting for a break. He had stopped seeing life as a series of hurdles to overcome. Instead, he began to view every challenge as part of his growth, as an opportunity to step closer to the life he had been called to live. He was no longer overwhelmed by the waiting. He had learned to trust the timing, and with that trust came peace. Jack knew he wasn't alone in this journey. Every door that opened, every connection that was made, felt like a divine appointment. There were moments when doubt still crept in, when he questioned if he was truly on the right path, but those moments grew fewer and farther between. Each day as he watched his business grow, he knew that the waiting season wasn't a punishment, it was preparation. One Sunday afternoon, Jack sat in his small office looking at the plans for expanding the shop. He thought back to where he had started, unsure, discouraged, and filled with questions about his future. Now, as he sat there, surrounded by the fruits of his labor, he couldn't help but smile. He had crossed a threshold. He had walked through his season of waiting, and now he was ready for what was next. "Chosen one," Jack whispered to himself, reflecting on all he had learned. "This is just the beginning." He had waited, he had endured, and now he understood. Divine timing had never failed him. All the trials, all the challenges, all the moments of doubt were part of the process. They had been the soil in which his dreams had taken root. And now, in this moment, he could see clearly. Everything had happened exactly as it needed to, and the blessings were only just beginning. With a renewed sense of purpose and faith, Jack stood up, ready to face whatever was ahead. This wasn't just a shop. This was a testament to his journey, a living, breathing example of what happens when you trust God's timing and keep moving forward, no matter how hard the wait. And in the quiet of his shop, as the sun set behind him, Jack felt at peace. He had finally found his place, his purpose, and he knew that with God's timing, anything was possible. As the months passed, Jack's business continued to grow, slowly but steadily. The once overwhelming challenges that had seemed impossible to overcome now felt like distant memories. He had learned to trust in the process, even when things didn't seem to make sense. The customers came, the repairs piled up, and the community began to take notice of the small, humble shop that had somehow become a beacon of reliability. One particularly quiet evening, as Jack was closing up for the day, he received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the words were unmistakable. A local developer was looking for a trusted mechanic to service their fleet of vehicles, and after hearing about Jack's shop from a few satisfied customers, they wanted to talk business. Jack's heart raced as he set up a meeting for the following week. At first, it felt surreal. Jack had worked so hard just to keep his doors open, and now an opportunity like this was knocking. But as he prepared for the meeting, a new wave of doubt crept in. Was he ready for this? The stakes were higher now. This could mean expanding, hiring staff, and managing a much larger business than he had ever imagined. But Jack had learned something important in his time of waiting. He was ready. He had been prepared for this moment without even knowing it. The meeting went better than he could have imagined. The developer was impressed by Jack's work ethic, his attention to detail, and the integrity with which he ran his shop. They offered him a contract, not just for one vehicle, but for the entire fleet. Jack was in shock. This was the break he had been waiting for, and it had come in the perfect timing, just when he was ready to handle it. Over the next few months, the shop began to flourish. Jack hired a small team of skilled mechanics, and they worked together to meet the growing demand. The expansion wasn't without its challenges, but Jack had a new confidence in himself and his ability to handle whatever came his way. He remembered all the times he had questioned his worth, his ability, and whether or not he was ever going to make it. And now, here he was, living a life far beyond what he had once thought possible. But the growth wasn't just professional. Jack's personal life began to improve as well. He reconnected with his family, took more time for himself, and started enjoying life again. The weight that had once pressed down on him so heavily started to lift. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. He had stepped into the life that had been waiting for him all along, a life that had been prepared through every hardship, every moment of doubt, and every second of waiting. One evening, as Jack sat in his office going over the financial reports for the month, he paused. The weight of his journey hit him all at once. He thought back to that time when he had almost given up, when the future had seemed so unclear. He realized now that every step, no matter how small or painful, had led him to this moment. Every trial had been part of the preparation. He had been shaped for this. "Thank you, God," Jack whispered, his heart full of gratitude. "I see it now. I see why the wait was necessary. You were always working behind the scenes. You were always preparing me." Jack stood up from his desk and walked outside to the small parking lot behind his shop. The night sky was clear and the stars shone brightly above him. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. He felt a deep sense of peace, something he hadn't experienced in years. This was his moment, the culmination of everything he had fought for, everything he had endured. But more than that, it was a new beginning. A beginning where he no longer questioned his worth, no longer doubted his purpose. He had come through the waiting season, and now he was living in the manifestation of everything he had been preparing for. "Chosen one, this is just the beginning," Jack whispered to himself, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. As he looked up at the stars, he knew that the journey wasn't over. There were still more challenges ahead. But Jack had learned that those challenges weren't obstacles. They were stepping stones. Stepping stones that would lead him toward even greater things. And this time, he would face them with the confidence and faith that God's timing was perfect. With a heart full of gratitude and a spirit renewed, Jack turned and walked back inside his shop, ready for whatever came next, knowing that his waiting had led him exactly where he needed to be. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Jack's business continued to thrive in ways he had never expected. The steady stream of clients, combined with the larger contract he'd landed, brought new challenges, but also new rewards. The initial nerves he'd felt as a small business owner were now replaced with a quiet confidence. Each day felt like a new opportunity to prove to himself that he was more than capable of leading this business, and leading it well. His employees became more than just co-workers. They were a team, a family of sorts. Jack had always been a solitary worker, but now, with the responsibility of a growing shop, he had to learn the importance of delegation. At first, it was difficult for him to trust others with the work that had once been solely his. But with time, Jack learned that the strength of his business wasn't just in his hands. It was in the hands of his team. He had to give them the freedom to contribute their ideas and talents, just as he had been given the chance to grow into his own role. The success was tangible now. The shop was busy from open to close. Jack made a name for himself in the community, and his reputation for reliability, honesty, and hard work spread far and wide. He even had repeat customers who came in not just for his skills, but for the genuine care he showed. Jack wasn't just fixing cars anymore. He was rebuilding trust in his town, one client at a time. Yet, even with all this success, Jack never forgot how he'd gotten here. He had learned to cherish the quiet moments, the times of solitude when it felt like nothing was happening. Those were the moments that had shaped him, built his patience, and strengthened his faith. His belief in God's timing had never wavered, even when he couldn't see the big picture. Now, when things went wrong, as they inevitably did, he was able to respond with calm confidence, knowing that everything was still unfolding as it should. But it wasn't just his business that had grown. Jack's personal life began to transform as well. He started to rebuild relationships with his family that had been strained by years of frustration and stress. He took more time for himself, taking long walks in the evening, visiting old friends, and enjoying the simple pleasures he had once overlooked. One afternoon, as Jack stood behind the counter, helping a customer with a repair estimate, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from his childhood friend, Chris, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. The message read, "Jack, I heard about your shop. I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. I knew you'd make it." Jack stared at the message for a moment, the words sinking in. For so long, He had felt like he was alone in his struggles, like no one saw the effort he was putting in. But here was a reminder that his journey hadn't been solitary. Others had been watching, quietly rooting for him from afar. The acknowledgement of his hard work and perseverance meant more than he could put into words.
As Jack replied to Chris, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. He was no longer the man who doubted his worth. He wasn't the man who second-guessed every decision he made. He had become someone who understood that every step, no matter how small, had a purpose. Every challenge, every moment of struggle had been part of his growth. He had been shaped, molded, and prepared for exactly this life. One filled with purpose, success, and the knowledge that divine timing was always at work. One evening, as Jack was locking up for the night, he stepped outside to the quiet street. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, the air cooler. He leaned against the doorframe of his shop, breathing in the stillness. It had been a long, hard journey, but the peace he felt now was worth every trial he had faced. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be more challenges, more moments where the path seemed unclear. But Jack knew one thing for sure. He was ready. "Chosen one, this is just the beginning," he whispered to himself, the words carrying a sense of finality, but also of anticipation. He was no longer waiting for his breakthrough. He had stepped into it, and with every step, Jack knew he was moving closer to the life he was meant to live, a life of purpose, peace, and fulfillment. He turned to head back inside, a soft smile on his lips. The shop wasn't just his business anymore. It was a symbol of everything he had overcome, everything he had trusted in, and everything he had become. And as he closed the door behind him, Jack knew that whatever came next, he would face it with the same quiet confidence, knowing that his timing, just like God's, was perfect. Months passed since Jack's business began to take off. The shop was now thriving, and his name was becoming synonymous with trust and quality in the community. But as Jack reflected on everything he had achieved, something deep inside him told him that he hadn't yet reached the full extent of his potential. He wasn't sure what it was, but there was a stirring in his heart, a quiet voice urging him forward, calling him to something greater. One evening, as Jack was sitting in his office, reviewing some paperwork for a potential expansion, he felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude wash over him. He realized that he had finally reached a place of stability. His dream, which had seemed so distant just months ago, was now a reality. But there was something more waiting for him. Something beyond the financial success, beyond the recognition. Jack closed his laptop and stood up, walking toward the window. The night was still, the streetlights casting a soft glow across the parking lot outside. It felt like the calm before something new, something monumental. As he stood there, his thoughts turned inward to the struggles, the waiting, the doubts, and the triumphs. He had been tested, shaped, and prepared. But there was more to come. Just then, his phone buzzed. The message on the screen was from his childhood friend, Chris, the same one who had encouraged him months ago. It simply said, "I knew you'd make it, Jack, but I also know there's still so much more in you. You haven't seen all that God has in store for you yet. This is just the beginning." A smile spread across Jack's face. The words felt like a confirmation. For the first time, he realized that this wasn't the pinnacle. This was the beginning of a new season, a season where the growth he had been through wasn't just about his business. It was about his entire life. There was more to discover, more people to impact, and more opportunities to seize. Jack knew that everything he had gone through, the failures, the waiting, the growth, had prepared him for this moment. He had become the man he needed to be to handle the next chapter. The waiting had never been wasted. The struggles had shaped his character, his perseverance, and his faith. Now it was time to step into a new phase of his journey. He sat back down at his desk, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes for a moment. He thanked God for the strength to get through the hard times, for the patience to wait, and for the opportunities that were now unfolding before him. But more than anything, Jack thanked God for revealing to him that this life, his life, had purpose. A purpose that would continue to unfold in ways he could not yet imagine. As the night deepened and the sounds of the quiet town outside continued, Jack felt a sense of peace that was deeper than he had ever known. He knew that he wasn't just running a business anymore. He was building something that was bigger than himself. Something that would make a difference, not only for him, but for others as well.
This was his season of overflow. This was his time to live out the purpose he had been waiting for. He was no longer looking at life as a series of obstacles to overcome. He saw life as a series of opportunities to step into, opportunities to serve, to grow, and to lead. Jack walked out of his office and into the quiet of the night, ready to embrace whatever came next. His journey had brought him here, but it wasn't over. This was just the beginning, and he was ready. The life he had dreamed of was now within his grasp, and with every step, he would continue to move forward in faith, knowing that divine timing was always at work. He smiled to himself, feeling a sense of peace that only comes when you know you're walking exactly where you're meant to be. And as the stars above twinkled in the night sky, Jack knew one thing for certain. He had stepped into his destiny. The waiting was over. The time for Jack's breakthrough had come, and it was only the beginning.